Hello, welcome to my apartment. Glad that you could join me. I really hope that everybody is staying safe and healthy. Before we jump into the understanding the interview process and how to develop your interview skills, I wanted to take a brief moment to discuss a story that I had when I was coming out of college. So, I graduated with an undergrad in applied mathematics, and right out of college, I knew that I wanted to go into statistics. So, when I was applying for jobs, I wanted to eventually get to Social Security to be a statistician for them due to knowing the history of the company and having a very good reputation in their statistics uh, department. However, when I got there, the interview was as sloppy as possible, not on my end, however, but on the interviewer's end. To start with, he called me the wrong name, had the wrong resume, and from there, it all went downhill. I felt like there was mass miscommunication. I felt as if I wasn't even in the room and he was just talking right through me. However, fast forward about 5, 6 years, I had a very good interview experience at my current job. So I was interviewing around the time, I would say the second or third week of December, right around the holiday time. So when I go in to have my first in-person interview with my potential and now boss, he was wearing a Christmas sweater, but not only a Christmas sweater, but an ugly Christmas sweater. It resonated with me a lot that not only was he wearing something that wasn't a suit and tie and very casual that really spoke about the company's culture. It made me very interested in the company and how they interact with their employees and potential employees just off the bat meeting him in person in this very ugly Christmas sweater. And he was very casual about it. Everybody in the office was wearing ugly Christmas sweaters. So when he brought in the CFO and he brought in the SVP of finance, they were all wearing ugly Christmas sweaters. They were all prepared to have a beer and watch a Christmas movie all together. Um, and it was a very good experience to have since I finally understood that how impactful an interviewer can be when trying to hire individuals into an open job. So before that experience, before I started really researching into the interview process, I honestly thought that HR just gave you a list of questions to ask in terms of what would be expected from this employee, knowing the job title, knowing the job description, looking at their education, the basics. It's being an interviewer, learning about being an interviewer when not being one. In the past, it was a very cool experience because I didn't realize how impactful they are. So outside of just asking about the candidate skill and how they apply to the job, there's a lot more information that goes into it. So I want to start with a little bit of statistics, since it is my background, into how understanding and developing these interview skills can be so important into the future when going into any type of hiring role. So the first one is 83%. So 83% of talent state a negative interview can change their mind about a role and potentially the company. 87% of talent state a positive interview can change their minds about a role or a company they once doubted. So, like my experience, I was very excited to have that interview. However, since I had a very negative experience with that interview, it ended up giving me a perception of the company that was very negative. It wasn't somewhere that I truly wanted to work, especially coming out of college. I was very excited to have my first job. However, I felt like I didn't belong there straight from the start when they didn't even know my name. However, going into another company, when I had a very positive experience from the start, I knew that that was the place that I wanted to work, and luckily and gratefully, I'm still at that company. The second stat is 72%. So 72% of hiring managers state they provided a clear description, while only 36% of candidates say they were provided this information. So just stating this is the miscommunication that could occur. So you could either be overly confident, You could either think that you are doing a good job, or you've even become content. You've done so many hiring interviews that you know what you're doing and you just are mindless in these. You know what you're looking for. You have your own bias. You say, this is the type of person that I want. And that ends up leading to miscommunication with interviewees. The issue with that is if you do want to hire somebody and they're not clear on what the actual job descriptions are or even just the roles, they most likely won't want to follow up for a second interview or even potentially work for you. The last stat is 60%. 60% of job seekers quit in the middle of applying to job solely because of the complexity of the application. So this could be an online application, it could be in person, or even could be just the process of applying for a job. The best experience I've ever had at applying for a job was only 3 steps. So a recruiter reached out to me and they put me directly in contact with the company. The company then had a phone interview with me. After the phone interview, they actually gave me a project, a small project to work on. So I currently work in finance. So they gave me, I would say, probably 3-4 sentences of data, financial data, and they wanted me to put together a profit and loss statement. And they wanted me to prove my education and my knowledge that I would be able to apply it to their job and understand just the very basics. They didn't expect for me to understand everything going into the job, but they were looking for I like to call an open vessel. They wanted to have somebody who wanted to be knowledgeable, who wanted to learn, but they just wanted to make sure that I had the basic knowledge. This was very easy. It was 3 steps. After that, I had an in-person interview, and after that there was a summary. They ended up reaching out to me, they gave me the opportunity, and of course I took it and I'm still there. The last thing you want to do is either on your website have a 50 to 60 page, and that is, over exaggeration of applying for a job, because that's going to deter potential incredible employees, solely because when they look at it, everyone's stressed on time, especially if you're working towards your MBA or any kind of education. If you don't have a lot of time to dedicate to just a simple application, you're going to deter individuals away from the job. Now, now that you get the basis of understanding why it's important and why developing your skills is important when interviewing, starting from the application process, I think it's important to go into understanding how you can understand the interview process for your company and how to even just prepare yourself. If it's your first interview or if it's your 100th interview, you still have to prepare. My suggestion, and a lot of people will agree, is that the best way to understand the interview process for your company or any future company that you may work for is to reach out to HR and just ask them, how are these applicants going to apply for this job? What is their understanding of what they're going to have to go through? From my personal experience, it's very good to have a personal understanding of what a candidate is going through in order to really connect with them. You don't want to be wasting their time. If they have to drive an hour out of their way and you don't even know the steps they took to even get there in order to talk to a recruiter or potentially anything like that, they're going to be upset. They're going to feel like they just completely wasted their time and they don't want to work for your company. So reaching out to HR and even just a coworker or supervisor who's gone through a similar process in interviewing a new candidate and just getting any background knowledge that you can is a great start. The second thing that I would do just to understand the interview process is just think back on good and bad interviews that you've been a part of, that you were the interviewee. What went really well, what went really wrong, and what do you think you should do in order to improve and even build on what your company does? In my experience, I took that small project or experiment that I was actually given, that when I go for it and I end up being a interviewer in order to hire an individual, I absolutely will want to do something along those lines. Not only does it weed out individuals that potentially tell me falsified information on the phone when doing a phone interview, but it also makes me understand how they think and get a better idea into their minds and see if it's something that I want to work with, if it's something that I can help them grow as an individual. And I think learning just from your own experience is very important. So while you're getting prepared to interview a candidate, uh, the first thing you should absolutely do is just understand your company's mission, the structure, and culture. And I think it's very important to understand your company's culture, as it is important to have a very variety of individuals in your company. However, if you are interviewing for, interviewing for a job that is a suit and tie, however, this individual is coming in something that I'm wearing, a polo and potentially shorts, flip-flops, you have no idea. It could be anything in that spectrum. They might not fit into the company culture, and you need to understand that. It reflects on you as a hiring manager who you hire. So you need the basis of your company's mission, the structure, and culture, and make sure that that is reflected in your interview process. The second step in order to prepare yourself for these interviews is absolutely read through the candidates' resumes. From my experience, not even knowing my name and even getting the college that I graduated from wrong completely deterred me from working at this company. It absolutely blew me away that they didn't even take the time to read my resume. So I highly suggest reading all the resumes that you're going to be interviewing for or with, and even just make notes. Have a notebook, title it just the individual's names, and make a few notes, because it's really good to have a open conversation with these individuals in terms of their experiences. So if it's coming up saying, oh, I have experience at job X in order to solve solution Y, you might be able to look at your notes and even dive into that deeper and say, well, give me an experience about you doing, Z. And this will help connect all the pieces and will even make it more personal, where the individual feels like you are listening to them and that you are truly engaged into the conversation that you're currently having with them. Something that is also very important to this step is knowing yourself. Learn and be aware of your personal biases and learn to combat them. And a lot of these you might not realize. So what I did is, on the presentation handout that is included in this, it's called the Harvard's Implicit Association Test. It's completely free, it's completely anonymous, and I highly suggest you check it out. And you, hopefully, I really hope, and the probability is still there that you might have a bias that you just don't know about, but just knowing them and being able to combat them, the last thing that you want to do is pass up on an incredible candidate just because you have this bias seated in yourself and you just can't get past it. And that's very, very unethical and potentially unlawful. One of the last things I would do for preparing for an interview candidate after you reach out to HR is that any specific questions that you have, always run it by HR. It's very important that you don't ask any discriminatory or unlawful questions, or even just put individuals in situations like maybe it's not okay to give them kind of a test like my boss gave me. The last thing you want to do is overstep your boundaries, and you want to make sure you are completely complicit with everything HR states, because again, how you handle yourself in this interview is a direct reflection on you and could potentially be a direct reflection on the company. While you're preparing yourself, going through all these steps, practice. It could be videotaping yourself, just like I'm doing right now. You're gonna rewatch it. You're gonna see what tics do you have? Do you have the proper body language? Are you shaking your leg? Could you potentially be doing something that would make the candidate feel unwelcome or nervous? Are you missing information? Are you looking at the ceiling? Are you looking at the ground? Are you fidgeting all around? All of these, unfortunately and fortunately, can be read by the candidate and other interviewers as negatives in the process. So what you want to do is really get to know yourself during this process, and I highly recommend practicing. I even highly recommend practicing with, I'll call it a test dummy, a friend, a family member, anything around that sense, who could be applying for the job. Allow them to give them your resume, and just go through it. See what kind of questions and how they react to these questions. It's a good starting point of your first interview or even just your 100th interview because you can always improve. Don't become content, always improve. So some tricks and tips that I personally really enjoy and that I love to improve your success as an interviewer so you do avoid, any terrible backlash from them is that you want to sell the job and prove to your company you can make the right choices when you are filling opening positions. The first thing you should do, during the planning process is just plan the objective of the interview and become prepared to the talking points that need to be covered. It's very easy to guide the conversation in an interview since the interviewee is very sensitive towards the interviewer. They're nervous. They want to impress the individual because they want this job, or hopefully they want this job. They're not coming in and wasting your time and their time. You're able to steer the conversation along productive channels. The last thing you want to do is get down this path of, it could be anything. It could be a personal story. It could be something about the job, and you could be spending of the hour interview 45 minutes talking about something that isn't productive. And when you leave that and you need to follow up on this individual, you truly aren't sure if this is a good candidate or not because you never steered it in a productive way. Make sure you understand you have the power to do so, and make sure you do that going forward. You should know and understand, as well as work on developing the 10 characteristics of a good interviewer. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to list off a few that I believe are very important. So one is you know how to sell a position. No one's going to be coming into your office or your company and they're going to listen to a job that's very boring. If you come out and say, even if it's just entering data, you have to spruce it up. You have to know how to sell the job. And it's not lying. It's understanding and giving them an idea of how the importance of the job is. They could just be simply plugging numbers into a computer all day. However, in order to sell the job, you need to give them the idea and the fact that how important their individual contribution is to the overall company and how it creates success. You need to ask the right questions, and that goes back to make sure you follow with HR and be compliant and on board with everything. You need to understand body language. So body language, and I don't expect anybody, unless they've specifically studied it, to understand and be knowledgeable about body language. What I expect is that you are aware of it and that you are developing better habits. So if I was slouched back in my chair and I had crossed my arms during this speech, I would feel like, or you guys would get the impression that I had no interest in discussing this. It would seem like I was guarded and I wasn't open with my arms crossed, and leaning back usually indicates that you're not interested in what you're talking about or who is talking. So if you're an interviewer and you're sitting in your chair and the candidate is, sitting upright, leaning forward in their chair, and you're just slouched back acting like, you're at home watching a football game, just relaxing, they're gonna feel like they're not welcome. Not only that, you can have great body language and to them it seems, oh wow, this person's really engaged. However, as a candidate, you become very nervous and you should be able to help them relieve their nervousness. And in order to do this, you have to be open in your body language. So you want to be calm. You don't want to point out their nervous tics, but you might want to help them calm down by continuing to steer the conversation and say and repeat back a lot of what they're saying so they understand that you're listening and it's just not going right through you. That will help them understand that it's okay to be nervous, but they're still going to continue to be confident because you're actually listening and understanding what they're saying. Now, the last characteristic that, again, didn't list all 10, that I am absolutely in love with is carefully take accurate notes. So while you're wrapping up an interview, you need to be very confident in concluding this. And you should be able to provide a summary of the steps they've already been through and potentially a summary of steps they need to go through next. So if you need to follow up with a individual that they had discussed, a previous boss, and like that, it's important to keep notes because you could potentially be discussing the same conversation or similar conversations with 5 to 6 individuals. And say that you had one candidate you absolutely loved, and you say, I want to fill this position with this individual. If you didn't take notes and you don't know who to follow up on, and it could be as simple as, oh, I want to follow up with their boss because, you know, they said they had a very good working relationship and I want to understand the culture of this company and how it might work with ours. You could potentially forget the boss's name. And the last thing that you want to do is email this candidate or call them and say, I'm really sorry, I forgot what you said, because then it seems like that small detail was not the only thing that you forgot. It's really important to be able to follow up with specific, important personal details when discussing these individuals after the interview itself. And the last thing that you might want to work on in order to improve success is just practice. I know I said it before, but as you're involving these tips and tricks that I included, you just want to practice. It's very important. Nobody's perfect, and you could be incredible. You could be one of the best interviewers in the world your first time. However, during your 100th interview, you might become content and complacent of where you are. So it's important to keep practicing to improve these skills, to improve yourself as an employee, as a hiring manager, because it's going to take you further. It's going to show that you can handle the responsibility of building a team, building a successful team. I really hope that you enjoyed this talk, and I really hope everybody's staying safe and everybody's staying healthy. And if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I did include all the links on the handout. However, if you have any questions about anything that we talked about, or even just want to go more in depth, please feel free to reach out because I would love to keep discussing with you. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope everyone's doing well. Thank you.